Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new NVIDIA daily update video. So today, as per usual, let's talk about NVIDIA. Let's talk about what is happening to NVIDIA, what we can expect moving forward, and all that good stuff. If you enjoy, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, etc., well, again, I do share my thoughts with my members every single day the market is open, as the market is trading. Definitely check that out. That link is down below. For just $3 a month, right? For instance, on Tesla, NVIDIA here, for just $3 a month, yeah, you get access to all of my Tesla updates every single day as the market is trading, options, so technical analysis, different time frames, etc. Same thing with NVIDIA, $5 a month adds NVIDIA to that, $7 a month adds non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA stocks as well that I share with. And of course, over the weekend, I do chart requests with members over on Discord every single Sunday. So definitely check that out. For instance, today, I don't want to share everything because, for the purposes of having my tier 3 members having this information to themselves, I think that's kind of respectful for them. But, Uber, I mentioned Uber this morning, right? How I was setting up. I actually was talking about it yesterday, but I said I wanted to see it kind of digest earnings a little bit more, and I'm looking for it very closely. And then I shared the setup, right? That I was, very interested in this kind of setup here. It's looking pretty good, blah, 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 blah. And obviously Uber looking pretty good off of that setup so far. Up, actually almost at my target already, but I still think it looks pretty solid. But just as an example of things that I share. Obviously, not everything is perfect. Not every single setup and thing that I share is perfection, but for the most part, I think it's pretty good. Most of them are quite good, but nonetheless, jumping into it, NVIDIA closing the day up 0.75%, closing at $180.77 per share, which compared to the market is going to be, kind of in line actually, right? QQ, for instance, up a nice respectable 0.34%, probably thankfully because of things like Apple, of course, but nonetheless, pretty much in line, at least with the tech sector. So what does this mean for NVIDIA? Where is the stock going? Is this still a bear trap? Is this still a bull trap? What's going on? Well, let's actually start off with the daily, or the 1 hour time frame. I want to start things off here, right? NVIDIA is in a very interesting position. It's a very peculiar position, actually. So it did break this high. That's number one. It did break that high, but then it got an instant rejection. So that leads me to believe that it's one of two things, right? Obviously, it's either a liquidity sweep. My neck is really sore. So you're going to see me move my whole body when I look to the side. I woke up, my neck was so sore. Either liquidity sweep or, well, it did still make fresh highs. Difficult to say which one is the strong one, because if it's a liquidity sweep, that's actually kind of bearish. The way I look at it is pretty simple. I'm not really using the fibs anymore because we actually breached those fibs. I think those fibs are kind of useless now, to be honest. But the main thing I'll be looking at is essentially this trend line right here, which, hey, what did NVIDIA bounce off of? That's exactly what I shared with my members, actually, not that long ago. I think I shared it somewhere around, that was Netflix. I mean, you can kind of see some of the updates I gave here, but I think it was here, yeah. As NVIDIA came out to the bottom end of the bottom area of the day that it was at, I mentioned that the trend line is coming into play, and that's exactly where we did find that bounce so far, right? Almost to perfection. So I'd be looking at this bounce, number one, this trend line, number one. But number two, it did, or at least it is trying to turn this area right here that was very obviously a resistance, or at least, an area of supply you can make a pretty easy argument for, right? Many areas you can see constant rejection for the past, 3 days actually, pretty much the rest of this week other than today. And then we finally gapped above it, came back down. Now we're so far turning this area into support, which is good news for bulls, and we're holding this trend line. So in other words, as long as bulls essentially continue holding this area as a support and this trend line, yeah, the bulls are in control. The bulls are absolutely back into control, in my opinion here. And especially if they start breaking and closing above pretty much 183, even better. But I definitely would like to see them get above that, right? I would absolutely like to see them get above that. So one thing I'm looking at that could be a potential is if I draw kind of like a little thing like this instead. For now, moving into the, short term, I guess you can say, which, maybe into early next week, let's say, I'll be looking at it in this kind of fashion. Two things, right? First and foremost, again, this is shorter term. Don't forget, this is like for the next few days, maybe up to a week. This area right here needs to continue acting as a support, number one. So essentially, if the bulls pretty much lose today's low and start closing daily candles below today's low, which essentially is below like 179 roughly, that's bad. That'll be a bit of a concern for me, especially considering the fact that most likely will start being, candle closures below the 9 exponential moving average, because again, it's going to continue slowly moving up. So by tomorrow or Monday, the 9 exponential moving average will be sitting close to 179, which that also will include, well, a loss of the 9 exponential moving average, something the bulls have been holding on to very powerfully, right? Very nicely. So very important. Watch for that, right? Watch for that, in my opinion. But the second thing I'll be looking for that could be actually pretty bullish here for a bullish continuation pattern is a potential, I say the word potential because we're not sure yet, but it has the look of it developing a rising triangle pattern, which if you don't know what it looks like, kind of looks something like this, right? where you can see in an uptrend, which obviously NVIDIA is in an uptrend. Is this picture, can I make this picture bigger? Why is it so tiny? I mean, hopefully, let me see. How does this look like to you guys? Let me zoom in a little bit here. Beautiful. I think that's a little bit clearer. Beautiful, right? In an uptrend, right? What does it look like? Well, you have a massive uptrend, and then you have, of course, well, the actual rising triangle. What is a rising triangle? It's a rising triangle is essentially when you're making higher lows equal highs. And you can see each time it bounces out that resistance and gets rejected, it comes back down to make a higher low, comes back down to make a higher low. Actually, this is what Apple was doing, which I'm very sad about because sometimes stocks, and I hate when they do this, they gap up above these resistances pre-market, and then it gets hard to find a really nice entry. But Apple pretty much was doing the exact same thing here. You can see, just as an example, right? Pretty much setting equal highs and rejections constantly, but each time it got rejected, it kept making higher lows. Very nice, very large rising triangle pattern. This is essentially the same thing I'm looking at on NVIDIA, but again, it's only on a 1 hour time frame. So keep in mind, smaller time frames equals smaller patterns equals smaller breakout, but hey, a breakout nonetheless. And that's going to be what I'll be looking for moving forward on NVIDIA, right? Something along the lines of this. But this very much hinges on the fact that we continue holding this trend line. This trend line is continue holding, or at least we don't break the previous higher lows. This was the first higher low, second higher low, equal highs, next higher low that we just had this morning. So in other words, again, in my opinion, entering a position, let's say here, not financial advice, with a stop loss below pretty much today's low, it's not a horrible risk reward. I'll be honest. It's not a horrible risk reward scenario, right? You're risking about just over 1% for potentially substantially higher, because if it does break out from here, right, and it goes like something like this, it'll most likely be a decent move higher. And I really wouldn't be shocked to see closer to 190. So the way I'll be looking at this pattern, if in theory I were to enter a trade from here, again, just for educational purposes, I'm not saying I'm going to right here, right now, where I am or have not or whatever, but I'll look at it something like this with a stop, give it a little wiggle room just in case you don't want to get stop hunted. But I would take whatever that low was, in this case 178.7 roughly. I would give it a little bit more wiggle room, so maybe below 178 itself, just in case. You never know, stop losses happen. I don't want to be part of that. And then I would obviously target closer to 190. And look at that. That's a pretty much 3.77 rough risk reward ratio. Not too bad, honestly. The more I look at it, the more I actually want to take this trade. Actually doesn't look too bad. But this is something that I'll be looking at right now moving forward when it comes to this overall pattern situation that's kind of setting up for the stock. So let's see how this develops, guys. I mean, this is, one way to find out, right? This pattern gets invalidated. Well, and we lose that low, it's invalidated. But as long as that low doesn't get breached and we ultimately break above pretty much 183 and turn it back into support, it's looking pretty good, isn't it? Looking pretty good. And at that point, I really wouldn't be surprised to see the very, very low 190s to be touched, which again, that's not a random number. That number exists because, well, guess what? That is roughly where that daily rising channel top sits at once again. If I take this thing and extend it a little bit over here, so we have a bit more space to play with here. And I'll extend the bottom one a little bit as well, so we have a bit more room here. Beautiful, right? Yeah, pretty much right to the bottom end or the top end of the rising channel, which will be somewhere, depending on how quick it happens. Let's say maybe even next week, maybe mid to end of next week. Yeah, low 190s absolutely becomes a very real possibility. Honestly, the more I look at the setup, the more I kind of want to take it now. It's actually a pretty decent setup. So let's see how this plays out. Now, not everything is perfect. The one caveat or the one potential small risk I see is the fact that the MACD is still making lower highs. That is a concern. That is a bit of a concern. I won't lie. That, I prefer to see the MACD making higher lows. That to me gives me extra confidence, or at the very least, be in the green. That gives me extra confidence in the situation or play or whatever. So the fact that it's making lower lows, I'm not gonna lie, it's not my favorite thing to see in the world, right? Would be better if it didn't, but it is. So that's a bit of a risk there. And the fact that the MACD is pretty much the second highest it's ever been. So those are the risk factors that absolutely are associated with this. But again, so far, overall, I still think it looks better than it does not, at least for the bulls, especially the fact that we broke those Fibonacci levels. And the final thing that I'm looking for on the weekly, which we haven't printed yet, unless tomorrow happens to be a massive crash day, we are still printing higher highs on the weekly MACD histogram. As long as that maintains, the bulls are still in full control. To me, I really start getting worried if we ever print a lower high on the MACD histogram on the weekly time frame. So again, unless tomorrow is a massive dump, there's a damn good chance we print another higher high, and we have to wait probably another week before we get any weekly indication that the buyers are finally getting exhausted. So far, that indication is not fully there yet. I need to see a bit more than that. So as far as I'm aware, the bulls maintain control. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, let's jump into the options flow to end off the video here. What do we see for the options flow? Well, the bulls, as usual, are still in a completely dominant position. So yeah, the bulls are dominant. Pattern looks pretty good on the 1 hour time frame. The bullish momentum is still there. The 90 is still holding.
The bulls are still holding, guys. I mean, again, the bears had a chance here, but I'm not gonna lie. The fact that they, let the stock gap up this far ahead, and it's kind of holding the green fibs now. But the fact that again, the good news is the fact that the risk reward, even if you were to long NVIDIA from here, is pretty decent, mainly because the stop is just so close to where the stock is right now. So you're only risking about just over 1%. It's really not much at all. But again, if we do lose 178, I do think that the risk for bulls becomes much higher. I think that's about it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you on Friday. Peace.